This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Since this is the first time that you've been on the Melt, maybe we will I like to act as if the listeners out there may not have any previous info on you. They may be coming upon you for the first time. Maybe if you could just give a little rundown as to what your background is and what brought you to the studies that your latest book is about.
Well, I'm a retired licensed psychotherapist. I've got over 40 years of frontline experience and picking through the thought processes of psychotics and criminally insane patients and some of the most volatile institutions on the planet. I went to work, started off at the biggest psychiatric hospital and probably on the planet. There were 10,000 patients there when I started off.
Wow.
I'm a commercial pilot. I'm a certified scuba diver and long distance motorcycle rider. Second lieutenant in the Arizona Civil Air Patrol. There I was an assistant scoutmaster. So awarded the Arizona State of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award. I got an award for teaching abnormal psychology in local community college. I got a BA in psychology from Temple University and a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia. I spent 2 years in a PhD program until I couldn't. Tower. I currently have a private practice in Tucson, Arizona.
You glitched there for a second when you were talking about your PhD. Tell me that again, because that's important to me because I'm on that track right now.
I stayed in it until it made me sick.
Great!
I couldn't deal with it. It was, by the time I got there, I already had 7 years on the front lines, and there was nothing there that I saw that would be of any clinical use other than their DSM when you get on and you can collect insurance.
Mm-hmm.
It was like going into a pressure cooker and them turning up the handle and how much information can you assimilate and regurgitate back to them, and then all these research tools, I was never going to use those. I mean, I did my own research, but I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
There was one place where the head of the department got up and was actually teaching us how to lie with statistics. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, rose my hand. I said, "What? Wait a second. You're treating that top 5% of the population as if that's the entire population. What's going on there?" I'll never forget his response. It was like, "Well, if they're too stupid to know what's happening, that's their fault." And I was like, "What?" Yeah, it just blew my mind.
That doesn't surprise me on one hand.
Yeah.
So how did you get into psychology? What was your, what was the entree for you?
Well, I came out of a pretty dysfunctional family.
Mm-hmm.
And came out of there spinning like, who am I? What happened to me? What is, what's going on in my head? Trying to straighten myself out.
Mm-hmm.
And psychology wasn't of any use.
Mm.
It wasn't of much use. The most useful thing I learned in undergraduate psychology was basic abnormal when you learned the categories. Okay,
Mhm.
but they didn't ever mention what you did about all those categories. They were
Mhm.
just descriptions.
Mhm.
They were descriptions of behavior that they had pathologized. There was no mention of what to do about it. Uh, the counseling I went through, it seemed, except for Rogers, I mean, where you reflect back and the patient understands,
Mhm.
makes them understand like what you're saying. But the rest of it, you know, none of it really worked when you got down to it. You're working with alcoholics and psychotics and manic depressives and some of these more serious. It's like using a BB gun against a rhino.
Mhm.
It just doesn't cut it. It doesn't work. The first thing I found that actually worked was the MACE energy system, and it had nothing to do with psychology or psychologists. It was invented by a ship captain
Is that
who was a
MACE?
MACE, the MACE energy system. He hit it on the head. I mean, uh, it can go in there and it can discharge trauma, lifelong trauma in an hour in many cases. And it
Wow.
actually works. I mean, the patient
Wow.
feels the discharge, they feel that it's gone, they feel better, their energy level goes back up, and it's just an incredible system.
And how did you find out about it?
It was strange. A fellow wrote me, and I get all kinds of strange mail. You know,
Mhm.
he wrote me and he goes, "I have someone you need to meet," and
Mhm.
that's all he said.
Mm.
You know, and I'm like, well, he doesn't sound like a crackpot, and
That's a good start.
he added, at worst, she'd be a jolly old lady. So that got my interest up. You know, I didn't know who he was talking about. It wasn't the typical kind of mail that I get,
Mhm.
and he wasn't asking for anything except me to meet this other person.
Mm.
And it didn't sound like that other person was a patient.
Mhm.
You know, so I wrote him back and I said, "What's the deal?" And it turned out to be Cherie Hatfield, who was the chief training officer for MACE.
Mm.
Now, I'd already read about MACE. I already heard about it. I read all John Mace's books. I was already using it uh, with my clients, uh, and it was working. There was enough information in the books that John Mace wrote to actually put it to use.
Mhm.
So I was going, it's working. I mean, it's working. I understood the theory behind it. I grasped it very quickly. I was able to put it to use fairly quickly. And it turned out that the jolly old lady was Sherry Hatfield, the chief training officer for the organization,
Oh, wow.
to a
Interesting.
conversation. And it was like, I didn't know what this was all about. And I was wondering if I was going to get snookered or something. So I was very cautious. And then I was like, I was ready to back out. And I think she felt that.
Mm.
And, they were charging a fair amount of money for this, to learn this system.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And it was already working. So I'm like, why should I pay more money for a system I already can understand and it's working?
Yeah.
Right.
And she went, well, there's a whole lot more to it.
Mm.
Um, so I went, well, you know, what do I got to lose? And we negotiated a price based on what I knew,
Mhm.
and uh, we went for it. And there was a whole lot more to it.
Mm.
You know, I would functionally, if I were going into therapy, I would trade my master's degree for this system
Mm.
because it works. Except for maybe Rogers stuff, and that's quick to pick up.
Mhm.
But this works, and they took it to the university of one of the universities in Australia and showed them it worked, and they said, "Well, we'll take it if you turn over the copyright to us." And they went,
Oh,
basically, screw you. We're not going to do
right.
that.
Yeah.
You'd probably shelf it. So they
Mhm.
went to the legislature, the Australian legislature. They showed it to them and said,
Mhm.
"Listen, this should be used in mental health centers. This should be used in counseling centers, and not the bunk that they're working with now." They saw that it worked, and then they just blew it off. They don't want something that works. They want the
Yeah.
status quo.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly.
When they
And
keep you.
the drug companies want.
Yeah.
They don't want anything that works more than anybody else.
Exactly. They want
Right.
you a lifetime customer.
Right.
And so where was this in your career? Like how far had you already been practicing by the time that you learned the MACE energy system?
Shoot, it was at the end of my formal career. So I'd already worked at the giant state hospital. I'd worked in mental health centers. I'd worked in the state prison in the psychology department for psych crisis
Mm-hmm.
in big. I went into private practice. After I went into private practice, that I discovered this stuff.
Mm.
Is
No, go ahead.
is one of the reasons that you think that mainstream psychology is sort of inept is because it's based in the material world? It doesn't really take into account anything beyond that.
Yeah, in the entire 8 years I spent in higher education or undergraduate and graduate school, spirituality wasn't mentioned once, and we're spiritual
Mhm.
beings.
Yes.
So they couldn't handle it. They
Mhm.
I think it was what, William Wundt or something like that. They got to the point where they didn't know what to do with the spirituality stuff. They couldn't measure it, they couldn't see it, they
Yeah.
couldn't feel it, they couldn't do anything with it. So they just disregarded it and went into the study of behavior.
Mhm.
So psychiatry and psychology is supposed to be the study of the spirit.
Mm.
They didn't know anything about the spirit, and what they did was did this divide. Well, we'll study the behavior, but leave the spiritual stuff up to religion,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
and both of them missed the boat.
Yeah.
Mm.
So Mace has its foot in both worlds. It
Mm.
uses the spirit to find where the trauma was buried.
Mm.
So they consider, it's usually considered that the human being's made up of body, mind, and spirit. John Mace found the fourth part, the
Mm.
identity, the
Mm.
person's identity, and everybody has several different identities. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you may have a identity as a student, as a car
Mhm.
driver, as a mother, or
Mm-hmm.
those are all positive identities that you created to help you survive.
Right.
Negative identities are created unconsciously during a trauma because your attention is turned on you during a trauma,
Mhm.
and you don't want to feel that horrible feeling of the trauma. So the ego comes up and goes, "Hey, I'll deal." It's still alive and functioning. I don't know if I lost you
Just
guys or not.
temporarily, yes. Are you
I keep
are you with us? We notice you're glitching a little bit.
now you're frozen. Yeah, we're having problems with the internet. This happens every time I talk about this stuff. Something like this happens.
Wow.
Go figure.
But yeah, the MACE system goes in and it discharges those traumas. So you'll still remember it, but it won't have the emotional charge.
Right.
So say you had a brutal father, who beat you, and it was just awful. You know, what happens is the ego will kind of bury that, and anytime somebody who comes around you who's like that father, it'll set off that negative identity.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reaction. It's not a response, it's a reaction. So you'll either fight with that person or you'll run from them or avoid them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Every time that thing's triggered, it gets stronger. So you get to thinking it's a part of your personality, but it's not. It's like a mind virus that was
Wow.
created unconsciously during a trauma that
Mm-hmm.
you're not aware of. But it's controlling your behavior, it's controlling your responses, controlling your worldview.
Mhm.
So the MACE method can get in there and just drain it. It's like a car battery. If you drain a car battery all the way down, it's dead. It won't come back to life again.
Sure.
And that's kind of what the MACE method does. It drains that negative identity, that negative energy that's stored in that pocket.
Now, do you know how, I'm sure you do, how John Mace arrived at this system, how he developed it?
He was a self-educated guy. I mean, he read everything. He read Plato. He read all the psychology books. He was a constant consumer, and he was slowly piecing this together.
Mhm,
Now, I think he did get a master's in counseling, but it took him years to kind of figure out how the mind works.
mhm.
And what he discovered was that the mind doesn't work the way that you're taught in school.
Right.
He says the mind only takes pictures of where you put your attention.
Mhm,
That's all it does. It doesn't rationalize anything. It doesn't analyze anything. It doesn't speak. It doesn't do any of that. All it does is take pictures. Wherever you put your attention, it takes pictures of that. Okay. He says the spirit does the analyzing, the talking, the hearing, the seeing. It takes care of everything else that we're told the mind is.
mm,
Okay. Now he found that the mind can also take pictures of emotions and um, what do you call it? Constructs.
mhm,
Um, and if it can take a picture of those things, it forms a picture to represent that feeling or that construct or that person. Once that happens, you can then drain it. You can drain the energy out of it.
mm,
And once that's done, there's no longer a reaction to a particular person or a particular situation. It's just you ask the person, well, how do you feel about that now? Well, I remember it, but it doesn't bother me.
mm,
I just got off working with a person. Um, she was a Mexican mother who had a horrible marriage, and she actually hated her husband,
mhm,
absolutely hated him.
mm.
Um, and when we were done, it was like, oh, I feel sorry for him.
Hmm.
Oh,
That was the response. When I asked her, think about your husband now. Well, I feel sorry for him. The
mm,
hatred was gone. The
mm.
vengeance was gone. It was all gone. It was all discharged.
Interesting.
But what was interesting with her is she heard a voice saying, "Don't do what he says. Don't do what he says."
What you were saying?
Yeah, yeah. She heard
Wow,
a voice come into her head said, "Don't listen to him. Don't do what he says."
wow.
Yeah, yeah. That didn't come from her.
Sure.
Which would be a good segue into another huge topic of yours, in relation to schizophrenia and what schizophrenics experience as far as hearing voices. That's kind of like a stereotypical symptom of mental illness that you hear in the mainstream. Like, yeah, they're nuts. They're talking to themselves in another voice in their heads. But you posit that those aren't self-generated voices, that those are voices actually from entities that are entering into this person's
Yeah, I
sphere.
don't just posit it. I know it.
Yeah.
I've been studying those voices for 40 years or so. So when I first got to the state hospital, I went in there believing everything that all the garbage that they'd filled my head with in school. You
Mhm.
know, the voices are hallucinations. It's due to a chemical brain imbalance.
Right.
Um, that the voices are when they told me hallucinations, I thought, well, like word salad. You
Mhm.
know,
Sure.
hallucinations are all over the place.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They make no sense. They're random in nature. They don't follow patterns. So I went in there believing all that crap, and you know, I was curious because nobody ever wondered about what the voices were saying.
Mhm.
I didn't see anybody there. There were hundreds of staff at this place. Not a single one of them was curious about what the voices were telling these people. No,
Strange.
what is that? And I'd ask them. I'd ask as many psychiatrists as I worked with. What causes schizophrenia? The honest ones would say we don't know.
Mhm.
We don't know. But the other ones would say, oh, it's a chemical imbalance in their brains. This is the garbage that the pharmaceutical industry, Eli Lilly in particular, came up with in the 70s after they developed Prozac. So they needed some way to explain why their drugs worked. So they just fabricated this total lie. They knew it was a lie at the time, and then they advertised it, and then it was picked up by Big Pharma, who controls the universities, who controls psychiatries, who controls the legislature, and they started teaching it in the universities. They had nothing to back it up.
Luckily, they've thrown all of that out. So now
they're
don't
still advertising it. I still
Right.
have advertisements I just got off the internet the other day, only they changed their tone a little bit. It is believed that schizophrenia is caused by a biochemical imbalance. Researchers think that.
Yeah.
Or doctors believe that. So they're still pushing the lie to sell their drugs.
Yeah. Big Pharma is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has been debunked.
Yes.
It's been debunked solidly.
Yeah.
And they didn't like it. So you look what they did. They first started blaming mothers for schizophrenia. It's their fault. They did something to the kid that But they looked around there. It's like, why, we didn't do anything. What's the deal? Why are you blaming us?
Right.
Yeah, you could see that. So they took it and they threw it up, and they started with the genetic stuff. It's the genes. And then when they couldn't find a gene, then they started. It's a combination of genes. So they took it out of the purview of psychiatry, the medical doctors, the entire population, and threw it up into this genetic stuff, where only a very minuscule portion of the population could understand this genetic stuff.
Right.
They put it out of reach, kind of going, well, you're too dumb to understand the genetics behind it. It's only these geneticists could. And it's believed that it's genes. Then the geneticists went, it took them a while, because geneticists aren't interested in schizophrenia. So they finally found, they said, hey, we don't see any schizophrenic gene. We don't see anything like that. It doesn't exist. After they drug it on for who knows how long, selling their toxic medications.
Yeah.
So once that was disproven, they needed to kick it up again somewhere else that the public couldn't get hold of and visualize and see. So now it's the biochemical imbalance. And that's what I was programmed with when I started off working at the big state hospital. But then I saw something odd. If it's a biochemical imbalance, they would need to know what that imbalance was to treat it. I never, ever saw a psychiatrist give any kind of lab test, any kind of EEG, EKG, any kind of test, hardcore test to measure what was out of balance or by how much. So I found that odd. I said, well, you don't have a baseline. How do you know what you're treating?
Right.
I asked one psychiatrist that, and he goes, oh, the pharmaceutical industry is taking care of that for us. They've given us all the information. You just use these drugs for da 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 da. It's like letting the fox in the hen house. And they were listening to Big Pharma. And of course, everybody loved Big Pharma work there, because they come in and you get free meals and here's raffle tickets and all this stuff. Everybody loved when they came, and then I started asking them.
You're muted.
Jerry.
You're muted, Jerry. We can't hear you. He knows. No, you're still muted. I don't know. It says it's on your side for some reason.
Why did that happen?
Oh,
there you go.
It was actually muted.
Yeah.
I didn't mute it.
Just mid-sentence.
Wow.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
You can hear me now.
Yes.
But I can't hear you.
What?
Weird.
How strange.
Here we go.
Bizarre.
Huh. And I can't find the place to chat.
No, I can't hear you.
Okay,
this happens all the time when I talk about this stuff.
No, I was telling him to hold on.
Let's see here. I don't know what I
maybe hit mute and then. How about now?
Now?
Can you hear us now? Huh.
That is so strange. I don't know what else to do.
Here it comes again. It's almost to be expected now. It doesn't do this when I'm talking about anything else.
There.
Here.
Do it.
Oh, now I see you guys are
Now
Can
we're
you
not.
hear? Can you hear
Muted.
us now? How about now?
muted.
You still
Check your
can't hear us?
microphone. I saw the muted symbol under it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we just clicked on there. Well, he can't hear
Can
me.
you
say
still
that.
hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. I saw when you went out there, your microphone was actually muted.
we did it
Can
on
you
purpose.
unmute it?
Yeah.
Let's see here. Where's the chat?
Right there.
Yeah.
Maybe settings.
It's nothing. It's
I know,
nothing
but
new.
How
sometimes-
did that happen?
I
How
don't
did
know.
that happen?
I don't know.
I mean, my microphone was actually muted. It was like somebody hit the mute button and put it on mute. Now the same thing happened with yours.
Weird. It's because we wanted too badly to talk to him. Crazy.
You can see the chat. I'm gonna.
You can try going out and come back in again, see if that helps.
Yeah.
Oh wait, maybe this. No. Yes.
How about now?
No.
Oh, he doesn't have his headphones on.
I hear us through.
Can you hear us now?
Yep, I can hear you
Oh,
now.
Okay, cool.
Fantastic.
Here, we're back. Yay!
So you guys muted it on purpose?
Yeah,
We were
to
just
try
testing.
to. Sometimes if you mute it and then unmute it, but initially we didn't do anything. It
Yeah.
just muted us.
Yeah, we were just
And
testing it.
I got muted too. So
Yeah, that's
we
so
didn't do
weird.
that. Yeah, very odd.
Funky. Very funky.
that happened every time I talk about this stuff. Something like that happens.
Yeah.
Sometimes the sound goes out. Sometimes the picture goes out.
Mm-hmm.
There's always some kind of electronic interference.
Weird. So, what were we talking about? What were you talking about, Jerry?
Well, I was talking about the biochemical imbalance stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
I do feel
What
like
I've-
there's a shift that is trying that there's kind of a new guard coming in that's trying to bring in like positive psychology and mindfulness. And there's like a new era in the psychological field that is trying to address some of the issues that you're talking about from more of a holistic standpoint. The thing I have found so fascinating is that diet is never brought up. So if
Yeah.
you're talking about a chemical imbalance, wouldn't you be talking about food and nutrition and what people are eating?
you
Because
would think so.
the people that I have seen who have schizophrenia or really severe depression, bipolar disorder, any form of mania, they eat a lot of sugar. They eat these highly, highly acidic and toxic diets. And there's no one in the mental health community that's talking about that, that's
No.
saying, oh, this could be glyphosate, or this could be, trying to go into more of an organic approach towards the food.
Yeah, food is important. I mean, they don't talk about that. They don't talk about spirit. And we're spiritual beings.
Yes.
So basically what they're dealing with is behavior. So
Mhm.
psychology is trying to deal with the behavior. Psychiatry, their medicines are to dumb down the behavior.
Totally.
Those medicines don't cure anything. They don't have any idea what the chemical balance of the brain should be. They have no idea.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They have no baseline.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
It's this lie that they just fostered on the entire public and then sold it because they have the money to do that.
Yeah.
So, and their DSM is the same thing. It's one of the biggest frauds perpetuated on the public that there is. All those things were made up.
I
All of them.
totally agree, because what I see with people who have mental health struggles and challenges is that they are desperate to be diagnosed to validate whatever experience they're having, so that then they can use that as the excuse. Oh, well, I have this, so this is why I'm an asshole. Basically,
For instance.
instead
Yeah.
of dealing with the real issue. So how do you're still seeing patients?
Yeah.
How do you approach someone who comes in who seems very deeply invested in their story, and they're very invested in whatever diagnosis this someone along the way has given them?
I just ignore all that.
I
I
love
just
it.
completely circumvent it.
I love it.
You know? But yeah, they started off with what was it? Like in the 50s they had like, you know,
Valium.
yeah.
Quaaludes.
Yeah, first it was
Uh,
Valium,
so,
Quaaludes.
so they had like 45 or 50 diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's 297.
Yeah.
You know,
Jeez.
all of them fabricated. You know, they were dreamed up by a group of psychiatrists in these meetings, and they vote these in and out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they don't like them or they're not working for them, they vote them in and out.
Yeah.
So once one honest psychiatrist said every single one of these mental illnesses were fabricated by breaking up segments of human behavior and pathologizing them.
Mm-hmm.
There are no blood tests, there are no lab tests, there's no x-rays, there's no EEGs to validate even a single one of these diagnoses. They're just classes of behaviors that a group of psychiatrists have voted to be a mental disorder. And then they give them an impressive number. I mean, you open that book and it looks impressive. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
here's all these descriptions and sub-descriptions and variations. And, you know, it looks like they know what they're talking about.
Mhm.
Thing is, they're all made up. There's
Yeah.
no test for any of them.
Sure.
A quote for this is a network against psychiatric assault, says the following: the new diagnostic Bible of psychiatry, the DSM-5, labels almost all human emotion as
Mm-hmm.
a mental illness. A
Mm-hmm.
child who talks back, a man who spends too much time on the internet, a
Mm-hmm.
woman who grieves the death of her husband or child for more than 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
are all labeled as mentally ill and
Mm-hmm.
told they need to be drugged. Unhappiness is labeled as depression, and people are encouraged to numb themselves with drugs instead of dealing with life situations that are causing their unhappiness. Over 2/3 of the psychiatrists who wrote the DSM-5 had financial ties to the drug industry.
Which
You know?
is kind of ironic, because simultaneously we are there's a whole movement of mental illness now. What used to be titled gender dysphoria is now it's a whole different reality, a whole different subset of behavior, and I think mental illness that is being seen as something else is being accepted as a lifestyle choice, almost as gender affirmation, while they discount the real things. Like they call natural reactions to life events mental illness, but they are taking this particular mental illness and sort of deifying it into something that, I don't know, I didn't even know the words to describe it, but a movement to get kids permanently addicted to the pharmaceutical industrial complex.
Yeah, it's sick.
Yeah, it's very strange.
And I have to say, US are on psychotropic meds now. It's a horrendous number. They make up what they want. They make up here. These are diagnoses that are actually in the DSM. I guess if you don't like caffeine intoxication disorder,
Mm-hmm.
sibling relational disorder, it's fighting.
Mm-hmm.
It's homosexuality.
Mm.
It's even other than that. It's Lawrence syndrome, being Florence, Italy. Symptoms include fainting with antidepressant drugs. These people are bizarre. Paris syndrome,
mostly Japanese patients visiting France. Symptoms include depression, anxiety, feelings of persecutions, which before the DSM would have been labeled cultural shock.
Mm,
I mean, they're
mhm.
bizarre. They
Yeah,
just make
very
these things
bizarre.
up.
Well, I was talking to one of my cohorts who has a professor who was a clinical psych, and he said to her that he would use the DSM-5 to get people treatment, and that he would basically change people, which, I mean, this, to me, this sounds so, it's a violation of any type of a oath that you have taken to do no harm. But
Yeah.
he said that he would change the diagnosis so that this person's whatever treatment that he was offering them would be covered by the DSM-5. So I think that when you have
Normal
this
operating
relate
procedure.
exactly. So when you have a relationship with an insurance company and with big pharma, then how are you possibly going to treat someone when the interests that you truly have are not for this patient? It's to placate these two leviathans and make sure that they're happy and that they're not investigating you. So just as long as you keep that machine going and spitting people back into the system, they're fine.
Yeah. You know, I don't know if you've ever spent any time working in private psychiatric hospitals, but that's kind of what they do. It's a drug fueled merry-go-round. You know, these
Mhm.
people come in. The side effects of these medications are awful. I mean,
Mhm.
nobody in their right mind would take this as a recreational drug, but yet the
Mhm.
psychiatrists are demanding that they have control over those drugs. You have to come to them to get them.
Yes.
So you got to pay their fee, you know, and then you have to pay for the drugs. Now, it
Yeah.
costs, you know, $700 to $800 for a month's supply of antipsychotic drug here in the U.S. You go
Mm.
across the border 60 miles south of here to Mexico, you can get those same drugs for $75, and they're still making a profit on those. And
Mm.
you don't have to go to a psychiatrist to get them. You can go to a psychiatrist the first time, he'll diagnose you and say, okay, I recommend this. Okay,
Mhm.
you go, okay, fine. You run out, you go back to the pharmacy and you get more. But not here in the U.S. No, you got to pay the druggist, you got to pay the psychiatrist, you know, his office fee. You
Mhm.
got to get the prescription, and you got to keep coming back, getting milked and milked. And what they do in the private psych hospitals is they'll put them on the drugs, give them a 2 week supply, and say, okay, you know, go see your psychiatrist or go see your insurance company and get these refilled. And then they go off them again because the side effects are horrific. They're
Mhm.
actually toxic.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
they're some of the most dangerous drugs that are used in medicine today. So
Absolutely.
they go off them, they go psychotic again, they come back in, they hold them for as long as the insurance holds out.
Mhm.
Once the insurance runs out, then they just charge them that same day with the medicines again, and it's just this revolving merry-go-round with each time they fleece them for $10,000 or so. Every time it comes around. And you know, it's the taxpayer who's paying it, it's the government who's paying it, it's the insurance companies who's paying it. That's one of the reasons healthcare costs are so astronomically high. This is
Mhm.
a fleecing machine.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
For sure.
they don't want it to change. They don't want a cure for schizophrenia.
Absolutely.
$1 billion dollars a year. Narcotic drugs don't fix anything. They don't even
No.
get rid of the voices.
No. They give
But
you
they got
new.
the entire population brainwashed to believe that this is the only treatment there is.
Exactly.
Well, and then you add on top of that the homeless population and how that is intrinsically related to people that have mental health issues. And I think what's really sad about that is that a lot of the people that are out on the street have some form of mental illness that is going untreated because the treatment is actually making them worse. So
Yeah, you got that. They closed down all the state hospitals all over the U.S.
oh God,
Started in California with Proposition 13 and just snowballed all the way through. The excuse they said is, well, they need to be around a more normal population. But they wouldn't take their meds when they were in the hospital. What makes them think that they're going to go out of their way to take them when they get out?
well,
They're not.
the intention was that local communities would then take up the slack. And so people who were in mental health facilities, state-run facilities, when they basically opened the doors and kicked these people out. I remember when it happened. It started in the 70s, but it really ramped up in the 80s. And I remember when it happened, I lived down the street from a state-run facility, and it was the dead of winter. And they literally wheeled people out in wheelchairs, closed and locked the doors, and just left these people outside. It was so inhumane. And these people had nowhere to go. They didn't know where to go. It was the saddest thing I saw, to see someone who had been inside a facility confused and not knowing, not really understanding that wasn't where they were staying anymore. Like, they just didn't understand what was happening.
They did
So
it to that many thousands. They did it to, and a lot of these schizophrenics, they couldn't work. They couldn't work. They couldn't hold down a job. So in order to survive, they had to either steal or sell drugs. So what they did they did that to save money. They didn't want to pay for these institutions. But where did these guys end up? They ended up in the prison, costing them twice as much in the prison. Does that make any sense? And then they brutalize them in prison in an abnormal psychotic population of these criminals and psychopaths. And then they hold them there for 10, 20 years, and then they release them on the public in much worse shape than they ever went in.
Yeah.
Now, does that make sense? No, this is
Not at all.
bullcrap.
Yeah, for sure. That's a polite way of putting it.
Yeah.
I would like to get back to the voices, the phenomenon of the voices, because I think this is a perfect example of the psychiatric industry completely missing the point of all of this and proving how they are based in materialism, because they don't recognize, as you have and have proven and have been studying for decades, that these voices are coming from outside, not inside, and that they're entities. So I would like to go more into that, because that's sort of what brought me to you in the first place. One of our patrons behind the paywall, we have discussions every month. Somebody brought your name up in the research that you do, and that's the situation with the voices and the schizophrenics was something that I found so compelling. So if we could go into that, I would love to hear more about that.
Yes. So, coming out of graduate school, I was brainwashed like everybody else. Voices are hallucinations.
Yeah.
They didn't let us get near a psychiatrist. How about your let's go into a state hospital. We were suck up all the crap that they were telling us and then spit it out.
Yes.
And that didn't wash well with me. I never trusted authority. I never did. So here I am, 4 years undergraduate, sucking in everything they had to say and then spitting it back out to master. At least they let us work in a prison in a master's degree, but not with the mentally ill prisoners. Basic counseling skills, stuff like that. So here's 6 years, and you still don't have contact with a clinical population, but you have to have a master's degree to do it, to work there. So I get there, and it's like nothing like I'd ever been prepared for. What I noticed is that the voices didn't appear to be word salad. I mean, these people were carrying on coherent conversations with somebody or something that I couldn't see. So it was like listening to a part of a phone conversation where you could hear the person talking, but you couldn't hear who was speaking back.
Right.
So I remember in undergraduate school, in abnormal psychology, a paper written by a clinical psychologist who they made us read it. It said if two psychotics met each other and they had the same delusion, if both of them thought they were Joe Biden, one of them would have to change and take a different delusion. And I remember, what sense does that make? They're both crazy. Well, why would one have to change to the other? I mean, it made no sense to me. But here was a PhD who wrote this thing, a clinical psychologist. I found out later that 80% of what psychology publishes is garbage. They did a research study on it. It's publish or perish. They have to publish. So they just publish all kinds of garbage. 80% of it is trash. So I remembered that. And I was doing rounds on the second floor of a psych unit once I got to work at the state hospital. And here's this guy carrying on a conversation with somebody I didn't see, arguing with them, talking to them, and, like stopping and waiting for them to respond and then talking again. So I crept up behind him and, tried to listen to what he was saying. And he caught me. So I introduced myself, say, yeah, I'm Jerry. I'm the psych for this unit. I haven't seen you before. I mean, what's your name? And he looks at me and he goes, I'm Jesus Christ. And I looked him in the eye and I said, no, I'm Jesus Christ. I just sat there and go, okay, what's he going to do? That I remembered all the way back to the undergraduate days.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there on pins and needles, like waiting. What's he going to do? What's he going to do? And he's thinking about it. He looks up. You can see his eyes rolling his head. He's like considering the situation. And then he comes to a conclusion. He looks at me and goes, we can both be Jesus Christ. And he walks off. What else did they lie to me about?
Yeah, exactly.
What else? Because you can't tell. I mean, there's no way to verify all that junk they're feeding you in undergraduate psychology. You can't verify it. It's like, oh, just believe us. We're telling you the truth. Value. Just believe. That didn't go over well with me. I never liked that. So that was the first thing I saw. And then when I saw them not taking any kind of baseline, it's like, okay, if you don't have a baseline, how do you know what's out of balance by how much?
Yeah, exactly.
It was a flaming lie,
Mm-hmm.
and they had perpetuated this on everybody, including all the psychiatrists, including all the graduate students, including the entire population. And they're still pushing it. Even though they know it's a lie, they're still pushing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to wondering what are these voices are telling these people. Nobody knew. Nobody was interested. Nobody was in. They didn't have the least bit curiosity. So I started asking them, I saw that they started running patterns, and one of the first patterns was they were all negative. They were completely, consistently negative.
Mm-hmm.
You're no good. You're rotten. Nobody likes you. You're a piece of crap. It was consistently negative.
Mm-hmm.
And when I found that out with one, there was no lack of schizophrenics at the state hospital. I had all I wanted, so I would go to another one. Hey, is this true? Does this happen to you too? One after another, after dozens. And when they all agreed that happened, I'd put it down as a pattern, and I'd still do it. But one thing that happened interesting is one time the voices don't want you asking questions about them. They don't. Right. I didn't know that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I found that out years later. They do not want you asking questions about what they're saying, what they're doing, who they are, what they are, how they operate.
Right.
They want no part of that. So I was asking this one patient about them, and the voices got hacked off. And he went to one of the psychiatrists and said, he's upsetting me. He's asking me about my voices, and I got upset. I got called up into the psychiatrist's office. This happened twice while I was working at the state hospital. And I was told the voices are hallucinations. When you ask questions about them to patients, you're only reinforcing those hallucinations and you're making them worse. This is what they told me. I knew that was bunk at the time, but they ordered me not to ask questions about the voices. They didn't want anybody even looking into it. So I had to be real careful there. But patterns started to emerge. And one of the first was negativity. And since they're consistently, persistently negative, the question I had was, what holds them onto a negative pattern? Why aren't they why aren't they scattered? Why aren't they random like all other hallucinations? Why are they persistently negative? What holds them on that course?
Yeah.
I had no idea. It reminded me of what was it, The Enemy Below, where the destroyer was chasing a U-boat, and every time he'd lose the U-boat, he'd go back on the same course the U-boat was on in the first place and pick him up again. It was like the same thing. They always return to the negativity. They say horrible things to these patients. You're no good. You're worthless. You're stupid. You're ugly. You'll never amount to anything. Every rotten thing that you can imagine is what these voices are telling these patients.
Yeah.
And the trick is they sound just like the patient's thoughts. There's no difference. It's not like you're ugly or you're stupid. They sound just like the thousands of other thoughts that go through the patient's head every day. Only they have a totally different intent. And we're told from the time we're born that any thought that it comes into your mind belongs to you.
Yes.
That's dead wrong.
Right.
That's dead wrong. Every negative thought about yourself or anybody else comes from the dark side.
So, Jerry, could you get any of your patients to describe the sound of the voice? Did it have like another voice other than their own voice?
No. 98% of the time, it doesn't sound like anything except their regular thoughts.
Interesting.
In some cases, it sounds different, but see, that's one of the biggest problems they have is what are the voices? Now, you got psychiatry and the medical establishment saying they're hallucinations.
Right.
They have no evidence for that whatsoever. They just went, we're the high priests of psychiatry. We say they're hallucinations, so you believe it. Bunk. They have no research into that. They haven't done any research on the voices.
Well, and
Who would research a hallucination?
What's going to reinforce that is if it doesn't sound like something different, if it doesn't sound like your mother or a demon or something, then they're going to say, of course, this is a hallucination. It's this person's voice that's speaking.
Well, they can mimic any person they want. So they can mimic the person's mother.
Wow.
And they know, since they have access to the person's memory, they can pull up every rotten thing these people done, because these voices are energetic. Your thoughts are energetic. Your feelings are energetic. Your intuition is energetic. It's all energy. It's not a physical thing. These voices, schizophrenia is an energetic, spiritual problem. It's not a biological. So what these people are doing, it's like if you have a magnet with a big magnetic field, you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't talk to it. For all practical purposes, as far as you're concerned, it doesn't exist.
Right.
You get a bottle of iron filings and you put it on there, now you can see the patterns.
Right.
So I've got 30 patterns that these things run that are consistent. They're anti-religious. They hate the 23rd Psalm. You repeat the 23rd Psalm, the voices go nuts. They can't stand it. Psalm 91, they can't stand it. They don't like the Bible. They don't like the person praying. They don't like them going to church. They don't like preachers. They don't like anything to do with religion. And it's not just Christianity. It goes for the Muslims too. It goes for any positive religion. Why would a hallucination be anti-religious? And see, these are things you can see for yourself. Anybody who's working around schizophrenics can see this for themselves. It's not hidden up in genetics or biochemistry. It's right in front of their eyes. All they got to do is open their eyes and look.
Well, and it's just because of the umbrella that they put it under, they just stop paying attention to it. They just go, oh, it's an hallucination. So then they don't even look further than that.
No, they don't. And it's worse than that, because basically by saying it's a hallucination, they're saying there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Only we can deal with it with our pills.
The gatekeepers.
Don't you even try. You don't know how to deal with hallucinations. We're the guys who do that.
Yes.
Take
So
our pills.
Jerry, do you think it's like a radio dial that these demons are able to tune in to someone, and then once they tune into that frequency, that's when they get the download of who this person is and what their life experience is, so they know what button to push?
Well, that's pretty close. That's pretty close to true. What I've seen is that it's trauma that breaks the person to start with. So
Right.
the trauma, It's a massive physical, emotional, or sexual trauma. That cracks the person open, and then they can get in from there.
Ah.
Or the use of meth. I've seen more
Interesting.
prisoners go psychotic on meth than any other drug. You know, number one psychotic on cocaine, but meth was number one. The prisoners called meth the devil's drug.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's a very low frequency. These things are.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
know, they're very low frequency. So it's almost like they stick the dial, the radio dial. They stick it at a low frequency, and you try to put it to something else, and they turn it back.
Wow.
So there's this constant feed of negativity that comes from these entities, but you also mention witnessing these conversations that happen. What on your side? What was being said back and forth? Obviously, this thing wasn't conversing by going, you're a piece of shit, and then the person is responding to that. What are they conversing about? Is it?
Well, I have some. I can go pull them up. I think I may even have them here. I have some conversations that I had with those things. So what I did when I couldn't do this at the state hospital because they were watching me too closely. So I had to be very careful there. But once I got to the prison, what I did was got a handful of prisoners who had agreed with me that they would tell me in real time what their voices were telling them while we were in session.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I always had maybe 10 or 13 of them around, and I'd spend hours in there with them. I can go look you up some of those conversations if you want.
If you are up for doing that, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, hold on.
Sure.
But,
sure.
There's like 30 of these patterns.
I want to hear them.
Yeah. Okay. After I go through these, because
okay, good.
You can go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, and they're all there.
Okay,
but
great.
They foster and create negative emotion. That's what they feed off of. They can't make it themselves. So, we're told that we're the top of the pecking order. No, we're not. These things are feeding on all of us. They're feeding on schizophrenics more than anybody else, but they're getting all of us. There's I remember a preacher told me he was standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, and he heard a voice in his head said, "Jump." A number of people said they were driving their car and they go, "I wonder what would happen if I turned wheel into oncoming traffic." Those are all thoughts coming in from outside. They don't belong to you. And that's what the schizophrenics are struggling with. What are these voices? Where do they come from? So if they believe psychiatry, that's the worst possible choice.
Yeah.
They're told they're hallucinations. There's nothing they can do except take these poisonous toxic meds.
Yeah.
There's a second group that says, I don't know what they are. They're not sure what they are. They got a chance. The ones who have the biggest chance of recovering are the ones that go, they're demons. They're not me.
Wow.
They have the largest chance. So these things foster and create negative emotion, anger, anxiety, paranoia, guilt, and shame. And they do this by inserting thoughts into the person's thought stream. Those thoughts sound just like the other thousands of other thoughts that the person has every day. There's usually no change in timbre or pitch. It's just all of a sudden, you're a piece of crap, or you shouldn't have said that, or you did something to offend this person, or those people are laughing at you. Anything they can put in there that will create that negative emotion. And then they energetically drain those people. You can talk to schizophrenics and ask them, how much energy do you have before the voices come? How much energy do you have after they leave? They will consistently tell you after the voices come and leave, they're drained. Some of them said they're drained so badly that they feel like they were working out in the hot sun all day.
Wow.
And these are consistent patterns. If they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. So what psychiatry is telling the entire planet is a bunch of crap. They have no evidence for it. It's just their proclamation as the high priest of psychiatry. There's nothing to it. It's garbage. It fosters their dependence on psychiatry and drugs and the pharmaceutical industry. The voices get louder after sunset. Once the sun sets, they get louder. You can see that in the old folks' home. They call it sundowner syndrome. They get crazy after sunset. They fight with each other. They get boisterous. They get uncontrollable. They get louder when ignored. So I've heard psychiatrists tell patients, I don't know how many times, oh, just ignore them. They're hallucinations. Just ignore them. I remember the first time I asked the patient, I saw the psychiatrist do that. The guy was on my caseload. I called him back a week later. I said, hey, the psychiatrist told you to ignore your voices. How's that working for you? He said, it's not. He said, they get louder and more persistent. And then I went and asked all the rest. You know, what happens when you ignore your voices? Every single one of them said they get louder. They get more persistent. They will not be ignored. You can't ignore them successfully. They foster self-destructive behavior. They're always getting these people to shoot themselves in the foot. At the state hospital I was at, they had a vocational school that they were trying to teach these people like low-level skills, you know, janitorial service and, you know, basic auto repair and hairdressing, that kind of stuff. With schizophrenics, what I noticed is as they were about to succeed, they would do something to sabotage themselves and fail. They would get thrown out of class. They would stop studying. They would not take their tests. They would do something to get them thrown out of class. They were always sabotaging themselves. I found out later it was the voices that were doing that. They foster isolation. They don't want the person around family. They don't want them around friends. They don't want them hanging out with anybody. They want them completely isolated in their bedrooms alone, listening to their crap all the time. And you talk to any family who has a schizophrenic sibling, and it's like they drive the family nuts, and then they go seal themselves in the room, and the family goes, "Yeah, thank God they're God. Let them stay in there." You know, we're sick of dealing with them.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing they could do, is let them stay in there with the voices by themselves. They need to keep them occupied with something productive. You know, these things that they demand the attention of their victims. They will not be ignored. They consistently maneuver for increased control. They're constantly battling the person for control. They're telling the patient to do this, do that. Don't listen to this person. This person's stabbing you in the back. You know, they're constantly pushing for more control. And the more control they take, the worse the patient gets. You know, and I've seen patients where they'd completely taken them over, and they were very dangerous. You know, a lot of these murders you see where psychotic people just go in and just mow everybody down in a shopping center. That's them. That's these voices. They've completely taken control of people. You know, they gaslight the patient. There was one patient I remember that they told him he had murdered somebody. You know, and he was so confused, he wasn't sure whether he had or not. So he's like, well, should I go turn myself into the police? But if he did that and he hadn't murdered somebody, then they would know he was crazy and they'd send him to the loony bin. You know, but if he did murder somebody, the police were looking for him. So he was in a catch-22. Every time he saw a cop car, he'd freak out. They're looking for him. And the voices would go, yeah, they're looking for you. You better go hide somewhere. You know, so they were constantly milking him.
Yeah.
And once they get a prisoner in prison, they get a psychotic prisoner in prison, it's a hog's trough in there.
Oh, I bet.
They rule the place.
Yeah.
These negative entities, they rule the place. No good deed will go unpunished in a prison. You know, believe me, I've tried it. You know, manipulating perception. They will manipulate how the person perceives what's going on around them. So if they're walking down the sidewalk and some people are laughing at a joke off to the side, the voices will say, they're laughing at you.
Yeah.
You know, or this guy's watching you, or this guy's looking at you, or somebody's following you. They will manipulate perception. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. So they know stuff that the guy's forgotten. I know patients where they had borrowed a dime 20 years ago and they never paid it back. The voices knew that, and they'd come up and they'd put it in his face. You did this. You remember when you did that? They demand that the victim not tell anybody else about their presence. So they don't want the psychotic patient telling anybody about the voices. And they will punish them if they do. They can create felt pain. You know, they can drive the person nuts. They can get very loud and very nasty. They're consummate liars. You can't believe anything they say. You know. So Sherry, my co-author, the book, she came up with what she calls the "That's a Lie" program. is you just, everything they say, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie. You can't believe anything they say. You can't make any deals with them because they lie about everything. You can't trust anything they say. You know, they consistently steer the patient away from anything that might generate joy. They don't want them watching or doing anything that they like to do.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want them to feel any kind of pleasure. They don't want them to feel happy. They'll do anything they can to screw that up. They'll short circuit reason. They'll get them to do things that are totally unreasonable. They'll get them to react in a knee-jerk manner to get them in trouble. They want them to be bored, because if they're bored, then they can get in and take over.
Mm-hmm.
They try to pass themselves off as the thoughts of the victim. That's their biggest trick, is they make the victim think that those thoughts are theirs. And I've had patient after patient ask them, who are you? What are you? Guess what their response was?
I don't know.
We are you.
Wow.
That's what they tell them. We are you.
Mm-hmm.
Plural. They foster selective forgetting. So, you tell the patient to take his medicines or do this or do that. They don't write down what they did. They forget it immediately.
Mm.
You try to talk to them, they don't remember it.
Mm.
They will destroy any vestige of positive self-concept. They'll try to pull their victim away from consensual reality, the reality we all function in, and move them into this alternate negative reality. They use confusion as a way of instilling negative suggestions, just like the hypnotists do.
Mm-hmm.
They cause all this confusion, and then they give them an out. Oh yeah, they're all confused. What should I do? What should I do? Oh, this is what you do. Oh, okay, I'll go do that. It's the same thing. So they had one guy to the voices, and they hated him. Well, we got lost again.
Are you there? You glitched there for a second. Are you back?
What's it went down for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, I'm up and back. But bottom line is, the voices aren't hallucinations. They run these patterns, and anybody can see them, hide them. You can see them for yourself. You get the list off the internet, off my website. They're there for everybody to see.
Oh,
Boo.
you must have questionable internet. You tired?
I don't know. It's this conversation. There we go.
It's
It's
knocked
intense.
off. Got completely knocked off that time.
I know. Crazy.
They don't like what we're doing. They don't like it.
Tough. We're gonna do it anyway. We have persistence.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
Yes.
You want me to go get some of those conversations? I can go. I think
would
I
be
know where they're
fantastic.
at.
Yeah.
Okay,
That would
please.
be great. I was so very excited for this interview, and it did not disappoint.
Yeah. You seemed like you were a little overwhelmed at one point, but in a good way.
I don't know. It was weird. It was like my energy I was so intensely focused on what was happening. I felt like I was being hypnotized or something. Like I started to fall asleep, but I don't know where that came from. It was just very extremely intense.
Well, he said that he was experiencing low energy before we pressed record, so maybe you were empathizing with some of that.
Yeah, I could have been picking up on some of that, but I am just absolutely blown away, and I definitely want to learn this John Mace energy system. That sounds so right up my alley, and like something that I could add to my treatment protocol for people. And I like the idea of it being like a short-term thing. I think one thing to remember in Jerry's case is that Jerry was in school decades ago. And so he is approaching his perception about academia based on that time period and what was going on in that time period. I think that there has been, I don't want to be so bold to say a new guard, because there is still so much of this stuff being entrenched in psychology and definitely in psychiatry. But I also think that there are avenues that are pivoting away from this and moving away from just strictly seeing people as a diagnosis and using the DSM-5 as a method to treat. So I actually feel very hopeful, and I have been so pleasantly surprised. And a lot of this probably has to do with the fact that I'm a McNair scholar. So I have a different support system as far as the next steps, getting into grad school, going for a PhD. I have people that are supporting my goal and my desire, and know that I don't buy into the pharmaceutical industry as a method of treating.
Yeah, well, that shouldn't enter into a psychologist's purview anyway, because they don't deal with drugs, they don't prescribe drugs. But that doesn't mean that the establishment or the funder of a lot of these textbooks and a lot of the information that filters down through these curriculums aren't somehow pushed by that. But that, that's just a launching point. It doesn't mean that necessarily has to permeate every syllable that comes out of these systems. I'm just, as you know, suspicious of any establishment, any system, including the academic system. But so I'm interested to see what you do with all this as you work your way through the tributaries of academia.
Well, and I think that I'm not going, pharmaceuticals do play a part in psychology because you're talking about people. So patients come in that are already on pharmaceuticals, and they've doctor shopped, they have 3 or 4 shrinks that they've already been to. They have a general practitioner that they go to who will prescribe meds. And so it's not just the psychiatry world that is permeating and reaching its octopus tentacles into people's psyches and into their lives. When you go into psychology and you're dealing with someone who has been in treatment previously, or maybe has been hospitalized or been in rehab or whatever institution, uh, it's possible that their attitude about pharmaceuticals is the thing to overcome. It's not necessarily that there's some finger wagging, overlord that's there. It's that that's happened before, and someone has said, "Oh, this is going to make you better." And so if people haven't had good experiences taking meds and they feel numbed out by them, or they feel dulled, or that they don't work, then some of those people may be more open to other modalities than just continuing on the drug route, because the drug route hasn't worked. So I think some people just get frustrated and they're like, okay, I don't want to take any more medicine anymore because it makes me sleepy, or it makes me fat, or it makes me not feel good, or, all of the other side effects of that. So they will start going into more of a physical treatment plan, like, okay, physical exercise, or looking at diet or meditation or other things. So I think that's what I was trying to say to Jerry, is that what was happening 40 years ago is not where we're at today. So there's a broader scope that people are looking at, and there's more of a spectrum of treatments that people are looking at that aren't just pharma based.
I've heard him on podcasts with that nurse that he's talking about, and those are, she's got some pretty wild experiences, especially since she does have the ability to see some of these entities. So I when he brought that up, I was like, oh yeah, I completely forgot. When I was researching this, when I was researching Jerry, I listened to a couple of those conversations, and they were really compelling and fascinating. So I look forward to having her on. I'm not sure if I listened to the other guy or not, but sorry to shift gears, but I don't know any more else to say about that. That world is completely alien to me.
I
purposefully.
I think what I was trying to kind of get across to him is that we can't paint with these broad brushes and say everyone is anything, because that's not how any type of industry works. Is that you're always going to have people who are interested in doing things maybe in a more organic way or a more holistic way. And I think that there's a rising of that. And Carl Rogers, Carl Rogers was part of MK Ultra. He was actually
I don't remember
working.
How he was brought up.
He was working with the CIA. He was he's the man he was the doctor who started group therapy, and he's the one who does mirroring, who says that, the patient says something and then you mirror back what they've said. So what I hear you saying is ... And so I just found that interesting that Jerry brought up Carl Rogers, because he's on the list, the Graham Hancock list of agents.
Graham Hancock list.
Graham Hancock made a list of all of the institutions that were involved in MK Ultra, and Carl Rogers' name was on that list.
Gotcha. Cool.
All righty. On that note,
I don't have anything to say to that. Yeah. I thought it was a great conversation. I'm, as I said in a few times in the conversation, I'm very compelled by the aspects that he brought, that he discovered, that just shows how inept many previous people who have dealt with schizophrenics have handled the situation, to not even have considered that, at least publicly and on paper, that that's a possibility, that something like that could occur, which doesn't surprise me at all, because, many realms of our society are governed by materialism that would even consider taking something like that into account. So it took somebody like Jerry, who didn't give a flying fuck about what anybody thought, and was just paying attention to these experiences and all the overlaps that were happening between all these different patients or prisoners, and made that connection that, after having been made, seems very obvious. So kudos to him for that.
Well, I think it's an important aspect of this to remember is that psychiatry is not, as he said, about spirituality, which means it's also not about religion. So I know we've gotten into these discussions before with Emily, anytime we've talked about these other energies, and I've said, demonic possession. And Emily has stated that that is coming from like the religious template. And what I'm saying is that with or without religion, demons exist.
Well, what a demon exists. Yeah. A demon is just one name for...
It's a semantic.
Yeah.
So exactly. I'm talking about, I use the term demon because it's an ancient term that has been used for thousands and thousands of years to describe this force.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about the whole psychiatry world is that what he's saying, and again, I try to play devil's advocate in these situations and say, okay, well, why would a psychiatrist not be open to demonic possession when, priests do exorcisms, and this is something that has been for quite literally hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of years. These are things that have been documented and explored, where priests or other men in the religious world have worked to remove these energies from people. So what I'm saying is that if you have 10,000, I mean, that's a small town. That's a medium-sized town. Imagine trying to do case studies and casework for 10,000 people. It just becomes like a mill or a machine. And so if you're a psychiatrist and you have a caseload of 20 people a day, 30 people a day, how many people are these people actually seeing in a day? How much energy and attention are they going to be able to give each one of these people? Of course, they're not going to have a moment to pause to go, okay, there's some other spiritual element here. This is not just a hallucination. They just put it under the hallucination umbrella because that's easier than trying to actually treat each individual person as an individual and see them and look at the case for a whole life, like, instead of just like, okay, this moment, this person's hearing voices, that's what they are, boom, next.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the case, sure. But what makes that easy to do is, I think, rooted in materialism, because
Exactly.
it's just it's the same thing that people attribute to drug experiences when they're hallucinating, as opposed to experiencing some objective reality that they have gained access to by certain states of mind, altered states of being. It's the same dynamic, like, well, that doesn't fit into something that I can measure and something that's in my books here, so we're just going to call that hallucination.
Right.
That's like what you call the boundary that you don't believe anything, you don't give
Right.
anything credit beyond.
Right.
Yeah.
But that, again, that's old guard thinking. That's not what's happening right now in psychiatry or psychology when it comes to using psychedelics in any type of treatment protocol.
But I think that the word guard is still going to be there. It's just the new guard, and the new guard someday will be the old guard. I think it's tricky to have guards of realms that I think minds might be opening. Hopefully, the curriculum of these schools is getting more open-minded, but they still, at some point or another, up the food chain, have to answer to somebody, um, and there has to be some sort of baseline where all this stuff is coming from. And I'm not sure that I trust. And this is just me. I'm not saying that this is the case for everybody, or it's even the case besides my subjective way of looking at it. But I think when you're teaching within the under the umbrella of an academic system, inevitably, and I could be totally wrong, you can, there's still, no matter how wide the boundary is, there is still a boundary where if you go beyond that, it's something that isn't either recognized or given credit, or um, isn't believed to be credible. uh, do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand, and
Do you
I
think
don't
that that's,
agree
you
because
don't
I'm
that
in that world.
Yeah.
So
But
I see what I think. It's one thing if you're a 20-year-old. It's another thing if you're a 55-year-old woman who's going into that world, who has more life experience. So the boundaries that I'm pushing are knocking that down.
but you are always talking about walking the tight wire, and that
Yeah.
that you are pushing against something, and like,
Yeah.
there shouldn't be something to push against. You should
Right,
have
but
all the room in the world.
it's the other students I'm pushing against. It's the woke agenda. It's the blue-haired land whale that I'm pushing against.
I wish. Yeah. um uh but there is, in one case, a teacher that you said that about.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
But I think that's 1 out of 100 that I've had so far. So I think that's a pretty good
Good.
statistic.
Good deal.
But 60 years ago, there was no positive psychology being taught at a Midwestern university. So again, I think what embeds these ideas is people like you, like Jerry, thinking that there's no progress, there's no movement, there's no, like, this is the way it is, and that this is why the system is broken. I think what makes things change is that people go into these situations and they say, this hasn't worked, this doesn't work, let's try something else and let's see if people are open to that. They wouldn't be having a positive psychology class or degree if people weren't interested in taking those classes.
First and foremost, I did not say it's not moving and it's not getting better. I said, even though the circle might be getting better, there's still a boundary there.
Right.
And it's interesting that there has to be something called positive psychology. What is all the rest of it? Negative psychology? I mean, that's just an interesting observation.
Cognitive.
Cognitive.
There's many different focuses in psychology. Neural, there's lots of, I'm not going to sit here because we have stuff to do, but
I have to go to the store and get celery.
I can send you, or I can show you the curriculum and you can see all the different.
You don't have to prove any, I don't care that much.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I just made that observation because I never thought about, I'd never heard you say positive psychology before. So yeah, that's all.
Well, we talked about the potential of me going to Naropa and studying Buddhist psychology. So there's another version of it that wasn't around when Jerry was in school.
Woke Ropa. Yes. I hope that they're not that way. I hope that's a
You went to the Woke Ropa, so
I didn't go to Naropa. No.
Didn't you go to some Rinpoche thing there?
Had nothing to do with Naropa. I mean, they were all under the umbrella of Shambhala, but it wasn't.
No, it had nothing to do with Naropa. Nothing at all. It wasn't there on the campus. You said you've been on the campus.
I have been on the campus just to visit it and check it out. Yeah, okay. I for years and years and years wanted to go to Naropa, and then I even was following them on Instagram, and so it was just the posts from the last 3 or 4 years that was just like, this has nothing to do with Buddhism, dude. Like, you're identifying with your worldly identity, and you're missing the point. So I found that discouraging, but I hope that that's only one small fragment of Naropa, because Naropa has a lot of promise.
All righty. There we go. That's our pitch that's our pitch for Naropa.
I'm gonna get it when we get off the air.
No, come on.
You're gonna kick my booty.
No.
Okay.
It's all good. It's all good.
All right. Well, we've been going on for almost 20 minutes.
I know.
Thank you all for listening. Hopefully, this enlightened you on something that you weren't familiar with before. Yes. Thank you to, I don't remember who brought it up in the meetup, mentioned Jerry Marzinsky. Who was it? Was it David?
It could have been David, but we're not supposed to say.
Yeah. Or Leela. Leela might have known.
I think there's a few people who brought it up.
Yeah. So thank you guys for doing that.
It's come up more than once.
Yeah. We love to have people put on our radar that I was not aware of this person at all. So, yeah.
It was amazing.
So keep it up. You can do that by writing us at the Melt Podcast at protonmail.com or
hunter-muse@protonmail.com.
Look at you. Gorgeous person. Yeah. Thank you all for listening. We love you. Fantastic stuff coming your way, and keep listening if it applies to your life. Hopefully you get something positive from it.
And we have lots of books. So if you guys want a book, let us know. Send us an email and we'll send you a picture of the books we've got, and we'll get you out a book.
All right. Thank you all. Farewell.